3 times a day, and the rancher's secret changed everyone's destiny. The rancher was a quiet man, the kind of person people noticed but never truly understood. He lived on the edge of a small town, where the houses were scattered and the fields stretched wide, meeting the horizon. The townspeople often whispered about him because he didn't join the town events or gatherings. He didn't boast or seek attention, yet his presence had a weight to it. There was something in the way he walked, the way he moved around the land, that made people pay attention without realizing it. His ranch was large, with fences stretching for miles, pastures that held cattle and horses, and a barn that smelled of hay and leather. Every morning he would rise before the sun, long before most people had even opened their eyes. The air was crisp and cool in the early hours, and the sky slowly shifted from darkness to shades of orange and pink. He loved those quiet mornings, the time when the world felt calm, almost as if it were waiting for him. From the first light of dawn, he began his day. He walked among the animals, checking each fence, making sure nothing was broken, and every gate was secure. He spoke to the horses in low tones, and sometimes the cows seemed to follow him as if they understood him. People in the town said he had a special connection with animals, but they didn't know the truth. It wasn't just a connection, it was something deeper, something that had taken years to build. Every movement he made on the ranch had a purpose. Every routine, every step, every glance had a reason behind it that nobody in the town could see. 3 times a day, the rancher would leave the house for a purpose that no one truly understood. He went out at dawn, at midday, and at dusk, and each time he returned, he seemed a little more tired, a little more focused, but never spoken of what he had done. People in town noticed this pattern. "He leaves 3 times a day," they would say, shaking their heads. "I wonder what he's doing out there." Some were curious, some suspicious, but most left him alone. They respected him too much to pry. Life on the ranch was not easy. The rancher had learned from a young age that work was the only thing that mattered. His hands were calloused from years of hard labor, and his face carried lines that spoke of long days under the sun and nights spent under the stars. He had learned to be self-sufficient, to rely on his own strength and wisdom, because life had taught him that no one else could be trusted to take care of the land, the animals, or the people he cared about. Yet, despite all the hardship, he never complained. He never let anyone see him tired or frustrated. There was a quiet pride in his work, a deep satisfaction in knowing that the land was healthy, the animals were safe, and the ranch was running smoothly. The town itself was small but lively in its own way. People knew each other, and everyone had their own struggles and routines. Some families were wealthy, some struggled to make ends meet, but most lived ordinary lives. They went to work, to school, or tended to their shops, and in the evenings they would gather at the local diner or the small church for a sense of community. And yet, even in this small town, the rancher remained a mystery. Children would sometimes peek through the fences, hoping to catch a glimpse of him feeding the animals or riding his horse across the fields. Neighbors would wave, and he would nod, but he never lingered. He kept to himself, and somehow that made people respect him even more. One morning, as the first light of dawn touched the fields, the rancher saddled his old horse and rode out across the property. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of fresh grass and damp earth. The horses lifted their heads and watched him pass, the cattle slowly grazing, and the birds began to chirp as the world woke up. There was a calm rhythm to his life, a routine that few could understand, but it was one that had been carefully built over years. Each action was deliberate. Each movement had meaning. He wasn't just caring for his animals or his land. He was protecting something far more important, something hidden that no one knew about. People in town noticed that sometimes, when he left at dawn, he would come back with a small bundle or a bag, carefully hidden under his coat. Other times, he returned empty-handed but seemed more thoughtful, more serious. No one asked him about it, not out of respect, but because everyone felt that some things were too personal to question. The rancher carried a secret, a quiet mission that shaped every part of his life, and it was a secret that would eventually change everything for the town, even if they didn't realize it yet. The days passed in this quiet rhythm. He would leave at dawn, return, feed the animals, repair fences, and work in the barn. At midday, he would leave again, riding across hidden paths that only he knew, sometimes stopping at small, forgotten parts of the land, sometimes disappearing into the woods for an hour or more. At dusk, as the sun sank behind the hills, he would ride one final time, making sure that everything was safe for the night. People wondered, but none of them ever saw what he did during those times. It was as if he had another life, a hidden world that existed alongside the ordinary life everyone else knew. Then one day, a storm came. It was sudden and fierce, with winds that shook the trees and rain that turned the fields into rivers of mud. The townspeople watched in fear as lightning struck near the outskirts of town, and some worried that the storm might damage homes or harm animals. On the ranch, the rancher rode through the sheets of rain without hesitation. He checked the fences, made sure the gates were locked, and guided the animals to safe areas. He moved quickly but calmly, with a determination that seemed almost superhuman. By the afternoon, the storm had grown worse. A tree had fallen near the barn, blocking one of the gates. The river running through the property had overflowed, threatening the pastures where the cattle were grazing. And then, as if the storm had a mind of its own, one of the horses panicked, running toward the fence that was weak and ready to break. The rancher moved faster than anyone could have imagined. He rode, shouted, and reached the horse just in time, guiding it away from danger. He worked tirelessly 3 times that day, repeating his hidden routine under extreme pressure. The townspeople began to notice that something extraordinary was happening. From the windows of their homes or while driving down the dirt roads, they saw the rancher in the storm, moving with a purpose that nobody could explain. Some watched in awe, others in disbelief, wondering how one man could manage everything alone in such chaos. And yet, through all of this, the rancher never stopped. He didn't seek help, didn't call for anyone, and didn't explain his actions. He simply knew what needed to be done and did it. By evening, the storm began to pass, leaving behind fallen branches, puddles, and a sense of exhaustion. The rancher returned to the house, soaked to the bone, tired but calm. He fed the animals again, checked the barn, and made sure everything was safe before finally sitting down, letting out a deep breath. The townspeople, who had been watching from a distance, finally understood that there was more to his routine than they had ever imagined. Those 3 trips he made every day weren't random. They weren't strange habits. They were a carefully built pattern, a way of protecting life, land, and perhaps even something no one knew existed. That night, as the storm passed and the sky cleared, the rancher looked out over his land. The animals were safe, the fences were repaired, and everything was in order. He thought quietly to himself, not needing anyone to recognize him, not expecting thanks. The work was its own reward. And yet in the distance, some of the townspeople began to whisper again, this time with a sense of respect and wonder. They didn't know the full story, but they had seen enough to know that this man's life, this quiet, disciplined, and secretive life, was extraordinary. It was the beginning of a story that would change the town forever. The rancher, with his simple yet mysterious routine, was about to reveal a secret that would not only touch his life, but the lives of everyone around him. People would soon see that sometimes, the quietest actions, the smallest routines, done with love and care, could change destinies. And it all began with those 3 trips a day, repeated every day, quietly shaping a future that nobody had seen coming. The morning after the storm, the rancher rose early as usual. The air was fresh, and the world seemed quieter than normal, as if it too was recovering from the storm. The town was buzzing with talk about the damage, the fallen trees, and the flooded pastures. People were shaken, but none of them realized that the rancher had already prevented much of the disaster without anyone noticing. His secret, carefully hidden in plain sight, was about to come to light in small but undeniable ways. That day, as he mounted his horse for the first of his 3 trips, a young neighbor boy watched from a distance. The boy had always been curious about the rancher, fascinated by the way he moved with confidence and purpose. He had seen the man ride out 3 times a day, always leaving and returning without explanation. But this morning, something was different. The rancher was not just going about his routine. He was carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth, holding it carefully against his chest as he rode. The boy's curiosity grew, and he quietly followed at a safe distance, hiding behind trees and bushes so the rancher wouldn't see him. The rancher's first stop that morning was near the woods, where the storm had torn branches and mud had blocked small paths. He dismounted and carefully approached a spot that looked ordinary to anyone else, but for him, it was important. From beneath the branches, he revealed a small wooden box, hidden as if it had always belonged there. He gently placed the bundle from his horse into the box, checking that it was secure. Then he returned to his horse, riding away as calmly as if nothing had happened. The boy watched in awe, wondering what the bundle could be and why it was so important. By midday, the rancher was out again. This time, the townspeople noticed him from the main road. He rode past, carrying nothing in his hands, but there was a determination in his stride that caught everyone's attention. Some whispered, "He's back out again." "What is he doing this time?" Others simply shook their heads, admiring silently. Nobody knew the truth. This time the rancher rode toward the edge of the pasture, where a small, old shed had survived the storm but was leaning dangerously. He dismounted and began to reinforce it, hammering and tying it with ropes. It was clear that he had planned this carefully, that he had been maintaining this structure for a reason that the town didn't yet understand. During his work, the boy who had been following him carefully approached, unable to resist his curiosity. "Sir," he called softly, his voice almost trembling. What are you doing?" The rancher looked up, his eyes calm but sharp. He didn't scold the boy. Instead, he smiled faintly and nodded. "Helping where it's needed," he said simply. "Sometimes the world doesn't notice until it's too late." The boy didn't understand fully, but he felt the weight of the words. There was more to this man than anyone had ever guessed, and he realized that the rancher's quiet actions had a purpose far beyond the obvious. Later that afternoon, the rancher made his third journey of the day. This time, the town could not ignore him. He rode to the edge of the river, which had overflowed during the storm, threatening to flood the lower fields where cattle and horses grazed. The water had reached a dangerous level, and several animals were trapped behind fallen trees. Without hesitation, the rancher tied a rope to his horse and carefully guided the animals one by one to safety, his movements precise and calm despite the danger. People who happened to be nearby gasped in astonishment. Some ran to help, realizing that his actions were saving lives in ways no one else could manage. As the sun began to set, the townspeople started piecing things together. The rancher's 3 daily trips were not just a habit. They were a system, a carefully designed routine that allowed him to protect the land, the animals, and perhaps even people in secret. Slowly, whispers turned into conversations. "I saw him at the river," one person said. "He saved the calves that were trapped in the water." "And the shed," another replied. "He reinforced it before it collapsed. How did he know it would be needed?" The respect for him grew quickly, though the full story was still hidden. That night, after returning home, the rancher sat quietly by the fireplace. He fed the animals inside the barn one last time, checking that all were calm and secure. His hands were rough, his clothes damp from the river, and his hair stuck to his forehead from sweat and rain, yet he moved with the same calm precision as always. He never sought recognition. He didn't want anyone to know, yet the town was slowly discovering the truth. Little by little, people would see the value of his hidden efforts, even if they did not yet understand the full picture. In the days that followed, small pieces of the rancher's secret became visible to others. A neighbor found a bundle of hay carefully placed near a weakened fence post, preventing animals from escaping. Another saw a trail of footprints in the woods leading to the small shed, where supplies had been organized to help during emergencies. Even the children began to notice that the rancher's actions had purpose and order, teaching lessons they hadn't realized they were learning. Respect turned into curiosity, and curiosity slowly turned into admiration. The boy who had followed the rancher finally worked up the courage to ask more questions. "Why do you do all this, sir?" he asked one evening as the rancher returned from his final trip of the day. The rancher looked at him with steady eyes. "Because someone has to," he said softly. "Because if I don't, no one else will, and because it's the right thing to do." The boy didn't fully understand yet, but he felt the depth of responsibility in the rancher's words. He realized that this man's life was about more than just work or routine. It was about care, protection, and unseen courage. Meanwhile, the town began to respond to the rancher's quiet heroism. People who had doubted him or thought him strange now began to admire his discipline and commitment. Some offered to help, although the rancher rarely accepted. Others simply watched, learning the importance of foresight, preparation, and selfless action. Slowly, the community started to see that change was possible when one person quietly did the right thing, even without recognition. Then came a moment that would truly test the rancher's secret. A local family, new to the town, faced an unexpected danger. Their small child had wandered too close to the river, which was still swollen from the storm, and a sudden wave threatened to sweep the child away. The townspeople panicked, unsure how to help in time, but the rancher acted immediately. Riding swiftly, he reached the child just as the water surged. With calm strength, he lifted the child to safety and guided the family to higher ground. Every step, every movement, reflected the knowledge and discipline that came from years of his 3 times-a-day routine. After the rescue, the family was in shock and gratitude. The child clung to the rancher, not wanting to let go. The townspeople gathered, realizing for the first time that the rancher's mysterious habits had not just been about the land or animals, they had been about life itself. The community began to see him differently. He was no longer just a quiet man on the edge of town. He was a guardian, a protector, someone whose secret actions had already shaped destinies without anyone knowing. By evening, the town's respect for him had grown immeasurably. They didn't know every detail of his secret, but they understood enough to appreciate the depth of his care and courage. Some were inspired to change their own routines, to think more carefully about how they could help others in small, consistent ways. The rancher's quiet actions were creating ripples, influencing not just his own life but the entire community. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of gold and orange, the rancher returned to his home. He looked over the fields, the animals, and the small paths he had traveled, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled. His secret remained mostly hidden, but its impact was undeniable. The town was beginning to understand, slowly but surely, that 3 simple trips a day, repeated with care, attention, and love, could make a difference far greater than anyone had imagined. The boy who had followed him now ran home to tell his parents what he had seen, eager to share the story of the man who did not seek praise, but had saved a child, protected animals, and held the town together in ways no one could fully see. The whispers turned into stories, and the stories began to form a legend. And the rancher, unaware of how much he had inspired those around him, simply continued his routine, preparing for the next day, the next challenge, the next opportunity to do what was right, even if no one else noticed. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and fresh grass from the storm that had passed days before. The rancher, as always, rose before the sun. His movements were steady, precise, and full of purpose, as if the land itself guided him. Today, however, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that even he could sense. A small, unusual tremor beneath the earth hinted at danger. The cattle and horses seemed restless, their eyes darting toward the far hills. The rancher did not hesitate. He had seen storms, floods, and emergencies before, but this felt more urgent, more threatening. He saddled his horse and began his first trip of the day. The townspeople, now more aware of his 3 times-a-day routine, watched silently from their homes and yards. Some whispered among themselves, curious, but no one dared interfere. They had come to understand that his actions, though mysterious, were always meaningful. Today, those actions would reveal their true significance. By mid-morning, the rancher had reached the far end of his property, where a small creek ran through a narrow valley. The creek, swollen from the earlier storm, now threatened to overflow its banks, endangering the cattle grazing nearby. The rancher's sharp eyes noticed a young calf trapped near the rushing water, its legs tangled in mud and reeds. Without hesitation, he dismounted, tying a rope around his waist and wading into the water with careful steps. The current was strong, but his knowledge of the land, the animals, and the water's flow guided him. He freed the calf, lifted it gently, and carried it to safety. As he worked, the townspeople began to gather, drawn by the commotion. They watched in awe as the rancher continued, moving from one animal to another, ensuring every creature was safe. They whispered among themselves, realizing that the quiet man they had once dismissed as strange or solitary was actually a protector, a guardian whose life had been dedicated to caring for others. Children pointed, adults held their breath, and even the older folks who had lived in the town for decades shook their heads in amazement. After the first emergency, the rancher returned to the barn for his midday trip. This time, his journey was not toward animals, but toward the small shed in the woods that had survived the storm. Here, he found that the storm had caused damage he had not anticipated. Supplies had shifted, tools were wet, and the structure itself was leaning dangerously. With calm determination, he repaired the shed, tying beams, securing doors, and making sure that the area would remain safe for any future emergencies. Each movement was precise, practiced, and deliberate. Every action reflected years of experience, knowledge, and foresight. While he worked, the young boy who had followed him before appeared again. "Sir," the boy asked, "how do you know what to do?" The rancher paused, looking at the boy with steady, calm eyes. "Experience teaches you," he said, "but more than that, paying attention teaches you. The world has a rhythm, a pattern, and if you listen carefully, you can see what is needed before it becomes too late." The boy listened intently, absorbing the lesson even though he did not yet fully understand its depth. The afternoon brought the most dangerous challenge yet. A small fire had started near the edge of the property, likely from a fallen branch striking a rock and igniting the dry grass. The wind was picking up again, and the fire threatened to spread quickly toward the main pasture where the animals were still grazing. The rancher acted immediately. He ran to the barn, grabbed water containers and hoses, and coordinated the movement of the animals away from the danger. Townspeople began arriving, some to help, some simply to watch, but the rancher's calm authority directed them all. His knowledge of the land allowed him to create natural fire breaks, guiding water to critical areas and controlling the spread with minimal damage. As the fire roared, the rancher remained focused, 3 times as active as anyone else could have been. He ran back and forth, directing people, guiding animals, and extinguishing flames. Sweat ran down his face, clothes sticking to his skin, yet he never lost control. His actions were not random. They followed the pattern of his daily routine, repeated over years, which had prepared him for exactly this kind of crisis. Every trip, every careful inspection, every hidden preparation he had done in the past weeks and months now made a difference in a life-or-death situation. By evening, the fire was under control, and the animals were safe. The townspeople, exhausted and amazed, finally began to grasp the scale of the rancher's dedication. They had seen him act with courage, skill, and quiet strength, saving not only animals but homes, property, and even lives. Parents held their children, pointing at the man who had protected them. People shook hands, hugged, and whispered words of gratitude, yet the rancher did not seek praise. He simply returned to his routines, checking fences, feeding animals, and securing the barn as the sun set behind the hills. That night, as he looked across his land from the porch of his small house, he reflected quietly on the day. The fire, the river, and the storm had tested everything he had built, and the results were clear. His 3 times a day routine was no longer a private habit. It had become a force that shaped the lives of everyone in the town. His careful, consistent actions had prevented disaster, saved lives, and inspired a community. Even though most people did not yet understand the full extent of his secret, they had witnessed enough to see that he was extraordinary. Over the next few days, the impact of the rancher's actions continued to unfold. A neighbor family, whose barn had narrowly survived the fire, invited him to their home to express their gratitude. "We don't know how to thank you," they said, their voices shaking. "You saved everything," the rancher smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "I just do what is right." Even as he spoke, the town began to understand that his life was guided by a moral compass stronger than any social expectation, fame, or reward. The young boy, now more curious than ever, followed the rancher with questions. "Sir," he asked one evening, "do you ever get tired of saving everyone?" The rancher paused, thinking carefully before responding. "Sometimes," he admitted softly, "but when you see what your actions mean to others, when you know lives are better because of what you do, you find strength to keep going." The boy nodded, realizing that the rancher's courage was not just physical, it was the courage of dedication, of quiet persistence, of consistent action that built trust, safety, and hope over time. The story of the rancher's heroism began to spread through the town. People who had once been skeptical began to admire him openly. They told their neighbors, their families, and their friends about the quiet man whose routine had saved animals, homes, and even children. Some came to the ranch to offer help, inspired by his example, while others simply watched and learned from his diligence and foresight. What had once been a secret life of careful, 3 times a day routines was now a visible lesson for an entire community. Then came the ultimate challenge, one that would test not only his strength and knowledge, but also the trust he had built with the town. A massive storm was predicted to hit the area, worse than any the rancher had seen before. The river would rise, the wind would howl, and the pastures would flood. The animals would be in danger, and homes near the ranch were at risk. The townspeople, now aware of the rancher's abilities, came together to prepare, following his guidance. They carried supplies, reinforced fences, and moved animals to safer areas, all under the careful supervision of the man who had quietly saved so many before. As the storm hit, the rancher moved with calm precision, 3 times as active as anyone else could have managed. He directed the flow of water, guided animals to safety, and coordinated the townspeople's efforts. Every step reflected years of discipline and preparation. Every action ensured the safety of lives and property. The storm raged for hours, but thanks to the rancher's careful routines and quiet leadership, the worst of the disaster was avoided. The town survived, the animals were safe, and the community learned the power of consistent, thoughtful action. By the time the storm passed, the townspeople could no longer deny the rancher's impact. He had become a living legend, a man whose quiet dedication and secret routines had shaped the destiny of an entire town. People approached him, not just with gratitude, but with admiration and respect. They had witnessed the strength, courage, and wisdom that had been hidden in plain sight for so long. And yet the rancher remained humble, returning to his routines, preparing for the next day, the next challenge, the next opportunity to do what was right. As the sun set behind the hills, the rancher rode across the pastures one final time. His horse moved steadily beneath him, the animals followed calmly, and the town watched from a distance, inspired by the quiet man who had changed their lives without seeking recognition. The 3 times a day routine, once a mystery, had revealed its true power. A life dedicated to care, preparation, and courage could shape destinies, save lives, and inspire a community. The rancher had done it quietly, humbly, and without expectation, and that was what made his story unforgettable. The days after the great storm were filled with quiet activity and reflection. The town was alive with gratitude, yet also a sense of awe. People had witnessed firsthand the power of the rancher's quiet, disciplined life. They had watched him rise before dawn, ride through storms, and act with a determination and skill that seemed almost beyond human. What had once been a mysterious routine, the 3 trips he made every day, was now understood to be a pattern of care, foresight, and courage. Slowly, the town began to see what his quiet life had truly meant. The rancher continued his work as if nothing had changed. He rose early, fed the animals, checked the fences, and maintained the barns. He still left 3 times a day, riding across his property, moving quietly yet purposefully. But now, the townspeople were paying attention in a different way. They didn't interfere or question him. Instead, they observed with admiration. Children followed at a distance, learning lessons without even realizing it. Neighbors who had once been skeptical now offered help and asked for guidance. Even families who had recently moved to town sought his advice, eager to understand the methods that had saved so many lives. In the mornings, the rancher began taking new steps to teach the town the value of preparation and consistency. He invited a few townspeople to watch him feed the animals, to see how careful attention could prevent problems before they arose. He showed them how to inspect fences, repair small damages, and move animals safely. He explained the importance of noticing small changes in the land, the animals, and the weather. His lessons were simple, yet profound. People began to see that caring for life, whether human or animal, was not about grand gestures, but about small, deliberate actions done with love and attention. One afternoon, as the rancher was repairing a section of fence near the pasture, a group of townspeople approached. They carried supplies, extra hay, ropes, and tools. "We want to help," one said. "We saw how much you do every day and we want to learn from you." The rancher paused, surprised but pleased. He accepted their help, guiding them patiently, showing them how to perform the tasks correctly, emphasizing safety and foresight. The town was slowly becoming a community that acted together, inspired by the quiet example of one man who had devoted his life to care and responsibility. Meanwhile, the young boy who had followed the rancher for weeks continued to learn and grow. He began to understand the deeper meaning behind the man's routine. It wasn't just about keeping animals safe or repairing fences. It was about consistency, foresight, courage, and selflessness. Each trip the rancher made was a lesson in responsibility and attention to detail. The boy started applying these lessons to his own life, helping his family, assisting neighbors, and paying closer attention to the world around him. The rancher's influence was quietly shaping the next generation. As the weeks passed, the community began to change in ways that were almost invisible at first but became clear over time. Neighbors communicated more, helping each other with small tasks. Families watched out for each other's children. The local school started lessons about caring for the environment and animals, inspired by what the rancher had shown. Even the older residents, who had once been cynical or indifferent, started to take pride in their town, feeling a renewed sense of connection and purpose. One man commented, "I never knew a single person could influence so many lives just by doing what's right every day." The rancher himself continued his quiet life, never seeking attention or praise. He continued to rise before dawn, make his 3 trips, and care for the land and animals. Yet now he was not alone. The town had begun to see that following his example didn't require grand gestures. It required patience, consistency, and the courage to do what was right, even when no one was watching. People had begun adopting their own routines, small but meaningful, that helped protect the animals, the land, and each other. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold, the rancher rode across the fields. He noticed the children learning to feed the horses properly, neighbors fixing fences together, and families checking on each other's animals. A deep sense of satisfaction filled him, not because of recognition, but because his quiet life had inspired a community to act with care and responsibility. He had taught them, without words or lectures, that even the simplest actions could have lasting impact. The rancher's influence reached beyond just physical protection. He had taught the town patience and foresight. People began to plan for the future, thinking about emergencies before they happened. They stored supplies, checked fences, and even monitored the weather more carefully. The town had learned to prepare for life's challenges, all because of the quiet example of a man who never sought glory but lived by principle. One day, a neighboring town heard about the rancher's deeds. Stories spread of the man who had faced storms, fires, and floods, protecting both animals and people, and whose secret routine had taught an entire community the value of consistent action and care. Visitors came to the town wanting to meet him, to understand his methods, and to learn how a single person could inspire such profound change. Yet the rancher remained humble. He shared his knowledge freely but never boasted. To him, the work itself was enough. Recognition was unnecessary. The true legacy of the rancher became clear not through awards or fame, but through the daily lives of the townspeople. Families worked together, children learned responsibility, and neighbors cared for each other. The land was better managed, animals were safer, and the sense of community was stronger than ever. The town had been transformed, and all of it began with the quiet life of one man, following his 3-times-a-day routine, acting with purpose, patience, and courage. Even as years passed, the story of the rancher remained a living example for everyone. Parents told their children about him, not just to celebrate his heroism, but to teach the values of care, foresight, and responsibility. Children grew up with lessons learned from his daily routines, understanding that even the smallest actions, done consistently, could make a difference in lives and destinies. The rancher had not only saved lives during storms and emergencies, he had shaped a future, quietly and without expectation. And yet, the rancher continued his simple life, rising before dawn, making his 3 trips, and caring for his animals and land. He never sought recognition, never asked for thanks, and never expected anything in return. His legacy was not written in newspapers or trophies, but in the lives of people he had touched, in the safe pastures, in the children learning responsibility, and in the sense of community that had blossomed because of his quiet, consistent actions. One evening, as he rode across the fields, the sun casting long shadows over the land, he paused at the top of a hill. From there, he could see the entire ranch, the town in the distance, and the people he had quietly guided and inspired. A sense of calm pride filled him. He had lived a life of purpose, not for fame or praise, but because it was the right thing to do. His secret, his routine, and his dedication had changed the destiny of everyone around him. The land was safe, the animals were protected, and the town was stronger. That was enough. The rancher's story became more than just a tale of courage. It became a lesson about life, responsibility, and the power of quiet, consistent action. People realized that heroism did not always come from grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it came from the quiet choices made every day, repeated with care, dedication, and love. The rancher had shown them that one person, living with integrity and purpose, could change destinies without ever seeking recognition. As the stars appeared in the night sky, twinkling over the quiet town and the vast fields, the rancher returned home for the evening. His animals were safe, the fences secure, and his land prepared for the next day. He fed the animals one last time, checked the barn, and finally sat in his chair, taking a deep breath. Outside, the town rested, its people safe and inspired, not fully realizing the depth of what the rancher had done. And yet that did not matter to him. His satisfaction came from the knowledge that he had lived a life of purpose, shaped lives, and created a lasting legacy through the simplest but most consistent actions. In the years that followed, the town remembered the rancher not just for his heroism during storms or emergencies, but for the quiet influence he had on the community. Families worked together, children learned responsibility, neighbors cared for each other, and the land flourished. His 3 times-a-day routine had become a symbol of discipline, foresight, and love. It had taught the town that even ordinary actions, repeated consistently, could shape destinies. The rancher continued his life quietly, humbly, and faithfully, never asking for anything in return. Yet the impact of his secret was everywhere, in the safe pastures, in the grateful families, in the children learning to care, and in the strengthened bonds of the community. He had shown that a life of quiet dedication, patience, and consistency could leave a legacy far greater than fame, wealth, or recognition. And so, the rancher's story lived on. His daily routine, his quiet heroism, and his selfless dedication became a lesson for generations. People learned that the smallest acts of care, done with love and attention, could change the lives of everyone around them. The town thrived, inspired by a man who had lived not for recognition, but for the good of others, quietly shaping destinies one deliberate action at a time. As the sun set on the horizon, the rancher rode across his fields one last time for the day. The wind whispered through the grass, the animals grazed calmly, and the town slept safely. His work was never done, yet he rested peacefully, knowing that his secret, his quiet life, and his dedication had already changed the destiny of everyone around him. He had not sought fame, he had not asked for thanks, but he had done something far greater. He had changed lives, inspired a community, and left a legacy that would last for generations.